Arjun Desai was just another street kid in Mumbai, but when he set foot in Los Angeles, he became a shadowy gangster whose empire spanned continents, and his rise, betrayals, and near downfall would shock the world. Please subscribe for daily new update of gang crime story and watch till end. Arjun Desai grew up in the narrow, chaotic streets of Mumbai, where the air was thick with the smell of spices, smoke, and the constant hum of life. Every corner of the city held a story, but for Arjun, the streets told only one truth: survival meant being smarter, faster, and tougher than everyone else. His family struggled to make ends meet, living in a cramped apartment, where arguments and tensions were as common as the peeling paint on the walls. From a young age, Arjun understood that relying on luck or kindness would get him nowhere. He needed strategy, cunning, and a willingness to do what others feared. The small-time hustles he took on, selling contraband goods, running errands for local gangsters, and occasionally helping with minor scams, were not just ways to earn a living, they were lessons in power, risk, and human behavior. Even as a teenager, Arjun noticed patterns. People who looked weak were often taken advantage of, while those who exuded confidence, even if undeserving, commanded respect. He began observing the local gangsters, learning their habits, their codes, and the subtle ways they manipulated fear to control their surroundings. He admired their power, but also saw their vulnerabilities. Arjun realized that intelligence and timing could be more valuable than brute strength. Every lesson on the streets, every small scam, was training for something much larger, something that could take him far beyond Mumbai's crowded lanes. When the opportunity arose to travel to the United States, Arjun felt a surge of possibility. It wasn't just a chance to escape poverty, it was a chance to start over in a place where no one knew him, where he could reinvent himself and pursue the kind of wealth and influence he had only glimpsed in films and news stories. He saved every rupee he could, made connections with a few trusted acquaintances who had already settled abroad, and planned the journey meticulously. But Arjun carried more than ambition. He carried the instincts of a survivor and the hunger of someone who refused to remain small. The moment he landed in Los Angeles, the city's scale and energy struck him. The streets were cleaner, the buildings taller, the lights brighter, and yet beneath the glittering surface, Arjun could sense the familiar undertone of danger and opportunity. The criminal world here was different from Mumbai's. It was organized, hierarchical, and ruthless, but it had cracks he could exploit. He started slowly, observing, listening, and learning. He took on minor jobs in the shadows, assisting with small smuggling operations and earning the trust of local operators. Each success added to his confidence, and each mistake taught him caution. Arjun's mind was always calculating. He noted alliances, weaknesses, and opportunities that others overlooked. Unlike many who saw the U.S. as a place to chase ordinary dreams, he saw it as a battlefield. Power, money, and fear could all be manipulated, and he intended to use every tool at his disposal. While most newcomers struggled to survive, Arjun was laying the foundation for an empire, using his Mumbai experience as both armor and weapon. By the time months passed, he had not just adapted to the city, he had begun to understand how to dominate it. What started as a quest for survival was quietly transforming into the rise of a shadow figure, who no one yet knew would become a name, whispered in fear. A man whose ambition had no borders and whose destiny would soon reach beyond the streets of Mumbai, all the way to the heart of America. Once Arjun Desai settled in Los Angeles, he realized that the rules of the game were entirely different from what he had known in Mumbai. The city was vast, bustling, and brimming with opportunities, but it was also a place where power had layers, and even small missteps could prove deadly. He quickly understood that surviving here required more than street smarts. It required strategy, patience, and the ability to read people like open books. Unlike Mumbai, where fear alone could command respect, the American underworld demanded connections, influence, and the subtle art of manipulation. Arjun began observing the local players, studying how they operated, who held real power, and where the weaknesses lay. He started small, taking on minor assignments that others considered too insignificant or risky. Transporting unregistered goods, facilitating underground gambling, and helping in discreet debt collections were his initial tasks. Each job was a test, and Arjun approached it with meticulous care. Mistakes were costly, and he learned quickly to anticipate trouble before it appeared. Word of his efficiency began to spread, first in whispers and then through cautious nods of acknowledgement. He wasn't loud or brash, he let his results speak for him. Within months, he was no longer just a newcomer. He was becoming someone to be noticed. Arjun knew that alliances were crucial. He reached out to other immigrants, those who had ties back in Mumbai or India, and forged partnerships that combined loyalty with mutual benefit. These alliances gave him access to resources and protection he could never achieve alone. At the same time, he studied the American gangs, identifying fractures in their networks and exploiting rivalries that were invisible to the untrained eye. He understood that fear could be as powerful as respect, but subtle influence often yielded better long-term control. Money flowed, slowly at first, then in larger, more lucrative streams. Smuggling operations expanded to include higher-value goods. Gambling dens flourished under his silent supervision, and his influence spread across neighborhoods. Yet, he remained cautious, knowing that each success painted a target on his back. Arjun avoided unnecessary attention, always staying one step ahead of the authorities and rival factions. He employed discreet methods, using intermediaries and trusted associates to maintain control without exposing himself. Despite the risks, Arjun thrived. He studied patterns, tracked loyalties, and predicted moves with near uncanny accuracy. His rise was measured but unstoppable, a gradual transformation from an unknown outsider to a shadowy figure whose presence was felt even if unseen. He began to understand the psychology of power, the way fear, respect, and strategic generosity could be combined to create an almost untouchable position. Every move he made was deliberate, every alliance carefully weighed, and every threat neutralized before it could escalate. By the end of the year, Arjun had established himself as more than just a gangster. He was a strategist, a manipulator, and a silent force shaping the underworld around him. Los Angeles, a city of bright lights and hidden shadows, had unknowingly become the proving ground for a man who had learned survival on the streets of Mumbai and was now building an empire in America. Each day brought new challenges, but Arjun was ready. The small hustler from India had transformed into a calculating figure whose ambition knew no limits, setting the stage for an empire that would soon be feared far beyond the city limits. Arjun Desai's rise in Los Angeles had been swift, but the higher he climbed, the more visible he became to those around him. Among the people he trusted most was Karan Mehta, a cunning associate who had worked with him since the early days of his operations. Karan seemed loyal, skilled, and ambitious, a perfect partner in Arjun's expanding network. Together, they handled smuggling, gambling, and other underground ventures, carefully dividing responsibilities to maximize efficiency while minimizing exposure. Yet in the shadowed world of crime, loyalty was often as fragile as glass. It began with small anomalies, missed payments, unexplained losses, and subtle hints that someone was sharing information outside their circle. Arjun, never one to act on impulse, started observing Karan closely. He noticed late-night meetings, unexplained phone calls, and moments when Karan's eyes betrayed secrets he wasn't ready to confess. The realization settled in slowly, like a chill crawling up his spine. Karan might not be as loyal as he claimed. Arjun knew better than anyone that betrayal could emerge from the closest of friends, and the stakes were higher in America than anything he had faced in Mumbai. The tension escalated when a critical shipment of contraband was intercepted by a rival gang. The raid had been precise, almost surgical, suggesting inside information. Arjun's network reeled with confusion and fear. He immediately suspected Karan, but evidence was limited, and acting too soon could provoke a disaster. He decided to gather proof, employing surveillance, discreet inquiries, and careful traps to reveal the truth. Every move required patience and precision. One wrong step could destroy everything he had built. Meanwhile, rival gangs began sensing instability within Arjun's operations. News of the failed shipment spread quickly, and whispers of internal betrayal reached ears eager to exploit weakness. Arjun realized that this was not just a personal matter, it was a matter of survival. He needed to reclaim control, restore fear and respect, and send a clear message without exposing himself prematurely. His mind worked constantly, calculating scenarios, predicting reactions, and planning contingencies for every possible outcome. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A low-level associate, unaware of the full consequences, inadvertently confirmed Karen's duplicity. Arjun's suspicions had been correct. Karen had been feeding information to a rival faction, undermining their operations and plotting to claim part of the empire for himself. The realization was bitter but not entirely surprising. Betrayal was the currency of ambition, and Arjun had always known it could strike from the most trusted quarters. He now faced a choice: act recklessly and risk open war, or execute a calculated response that would neutralize the threat and consolidate power. Arjun chose strategy over emotion. Over the next weeks, he orchestrated subtle moves to isolate Karan, cutting off his access to critical operations while monitoring his alliances. Every decision sent a ripple through the network, quietly reinforcing Arjun's authority. Karan remained unaware that he was already trapped, a pawn in a game far larger than he had anticipated. By the time Arjun was ready to confront him directly, the damage had been contained, rivals had been deterred, and the empire's foundation, though shaken, remained intact. Through the ordeal, Arjun understood a crucial truth. In the underworld, trust was a weapon, and betrayal was inevitable. The streets of Mumbai had taught him survival, but Los Angeles was teaching him mastery. Every alliance had a hidden cost. Every success invited scrutiny, and every friend could turn into a foe. Arjun realized that to remain untouchable, he would have to anticipate not just the moves of rivals, but the intentions of those closest to him. It was a lesson in power that would shape every decision he made in the chapters to come. Arjun Desai had always been careful, but even the most meticulous plans could attract unwanted attention. His empire in Los Angeles was growing, spreading its influence through smuggling, underground gambling, and illicit trades that connected back to Mumbai. Each success, each new alliance, added wealth and power, but it also created trails that did not go unnoticed by the law. Federal authorities, having observed patterns and anomalies in financial transactions, began to dig deeper. What had started as scattered reports of illegal activity evolved into a coordinated investigation, and the net slowly began closing around Arjun. It started with surveillance. Unmarked cars were spotted near his safe houses, and strangers seemed to appear at odd hours around his operations. At first, Arjun dismissed them as rivals, but the precision of their movements suggested professional involvement. He realized that this was not the work of local gangs, it was law enforcement, quietly mapping his empire, cataloging weaknesses, and identifying associates. The gravity of the situation sank in. This was not merely about competition or betrayal. It was about survival against an organization trained to dismantle empires like his. The raids began subtly. Small warehouses were searched, cash was confiscated, and a few low-level associates were arrested, under charges that hinted at larger networks. Arjun remained untouched, hidden behind layers of planning, but the fear was palpable. Every shipment, every transaction, became a calculated risk. He doubled security, changed routines, and instructed trusted lieutenants to act only under strict protocols. Each move was deliberate, aimed at staying one step ahead of investigators while maintaining the flow of operations. Yet, law enforcement was relentless. They traced communications, followed financial trails, and gradually connected the dots that led back to Arjun. Even his most discreet methods could not escape scrutiny entirely. Anonymous tips, intercepted calls, and unexpected raids created tension within his ranks. Associates grew nervous, some openly fearful of arrest, others quietly plotting their own survival. Arjun had always known that pressure would expose cracks, but he also understood that panic could be manipulated. He maintained a calm demeanor, projecting control even as shadows of doubt spread among his team. The stress of being hunted changed Arjun. Nights were spent planning escape routes, contingency strategies, and ways to mislead investigators. He used disguises, rotated safe houses, and conducted operations through intermediaries to reduce direct exposure. Every success against the law reinforced his confidence, but every close call reminded him that his empire, no matter how powerful, was fragile in the face of organized authority. The realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. He had become a master at survival, but survival required constant vigilance, clever manipulation, and a willingness to make ruthless choices. Despite the pressure, Arjun refused to shrink from the streets he had come to dominate. He continued to expand influence quietly, using secrecy as armor. The city, with all its wealth and opportunities, was now a chessboard, and he was a player anticipating moves several steps ahead. Every encounter with law enforcement, every narrowly avoided arrest, reinforced his belief in patience and strategy. Arjun understood that power in the underworld was not only about fear or loyalty, it was also about adaptability, foresight, and the ability to outthink an opponent who could strike with immense authority. By the end of the year, Arjun's operations had survived the first wave of law enforcement scrutiny. The raids had caused disruptions, yet he emerged intact, having learned the intricacies of evasion and manipulation. He had realized that in this world, intelligence could equal brute strength, and that even the shadows of the law could be used to sharpen one's instincts. Arjun Desai was no longer just a Mumbai gangster in Los Angeles. He had become a strategist, a survivor, and a figure whose story would grow darker and more complex in the battles that lay ahead. As Arjun Desai's empire in Los Angeles grew, he realized that local power alone could not guarantee survival. Rival gangs were relentless, law enforcement pressure remained constant, and the cracks within his own network from past betrayals still lingered. To strengthen his position, he needed allies beyond the city, a network that could provide both protection and opportunities. That's when the Chicago crime syndicate came into the picture, a group notorious for its ruthlessness and far-reaching influence. Aligning with them was risky, but Arjun saw the potential resources, manpower, and a reputation that could elevate his status to a level no one in Los Angeles could challenge. The alliance was far from easy. Chicago's leaders were not impressed by Arjun's accomplishments. They wanted proof of loyalty and capability. Initiation into their operations demanded actions that tested his limits. Smuggling assignments became deadlier, involving high-risk routes and volatile intermediaries. Arjun had to demonstrate not just efficiency, but also an ability to enforce fear, punish betrayal, and maintain discipline within his ranks. Each assignment was a test, and failure was not an option. Mistakes meant death or betrayal, and the Chicago syndicate's watchful eyes left no margin for error. Despite the dangers, Arjun adapted quickly. His experience from Mumbai and Los Angeles allowed him to anticipate threats and manipulate outcomes. He orchestrated operations with precision, carefully balancing aggression and strategy. His associates learned to follow instructions without hesitation, knowing that any misstep could provoke both Arjun's wrath and the Chicago syndicate's punishment. Slowly, he earned their respect, though he never fully trusted them. Arjun understood that alliances built on fear were fragile, and that loyalty could shift when profit or survival dictated. As his empire strengthened, paranoia grew. The more powerful he became, the more enemies lurked in the shadows. He began to notice subtle challenges, associates testing his authority, minor acts of defiance, and whispers of discontent. Arjun knew that maintaining control required more than fear. It required manipulation, observation, and strategic intimidation. He orchestrated small, calculated punishments for those who strayed, demonstrating his reach without provoking unnecessary rebellion. Each act was a reminder that his authority was absolute, that betrayal would not be tolerated, and that survival required submission. Yet, the alliance with Chicago came with hidden costs. Their demands were unyielding, and their influence reached into every corner of his operations. Arjun had to balance the need for expansion with the risk of exposure, carefully choosing which ventures to pursue and which to avoid. He became a master of discretion, running multiple layers of operations to shield himself while feeding just enough information to satisfy his partners. Each day was a delicate game, where a single misstep could unravel years of planning and hard-earned power. Through it all, Arjun's reputation grew. Stories of his ruthlessness, intelligence, and ability to survive impossible situations spread among rival gangs. Los Angeles knew him as a shadowy figure, a man who could strike without warning and vanish without trace. Chicago recognized his talent, yet remained cautious, aware that such ambition could turn dangerous. Arjun Desai had become a force that transcended geography, a man whose influence stretched from Mumbai to Los Angeles and now reached into the heart of the Midwest's deadliest criminal circles. Each day brought new challenges, but he thrived on the tension, understanding that power was never static and that true control required constant vigilance, ruthless decisions, and the ability to outthink everyone around him. Arjun Desai's empire was at its peak when an unexpected betrayal shook him to the core. Despite years of careful planning, disciplined operations, and a rising reputation that commanded fear across cities, he discovered that one of his oldest allies had been undermining him from the shadows. Ravi Kapoor, a trusted lieutenant who had stood by Arjun since his earliest days in Los Angeles, had been secretly providing information to a rival gang. The revelation came through an insider who had grown careless, unaware of the full consequences of their words. Arjun's first reaction was disbelief, followed by the cold, calculating rage that had become a part of him. The betrayal was more than personal, it threatened the very foundation of his empire. Deals were compromised, shipments intercepted, and some operations had already collapsed due to leaked information. Arjun realized that Ravi's treachery had been carefully concealed for months, perhaps years, slowly eroding his control while maintaining the illusion of loyalty. Every success he had achieved now carried the shadow of doubt. He understood that exposure at this level could lead to the dismantling of his empire, arrests of key associates, and violent retaliation from both rivals and the authorities. Instead of reacting impulsively, Arjun relied on the lessons he had learned from Mumbai and Los Angeles. He began to observe Ravi's movements, interactions, and communications with heightened scrutiny. Subtle traps were set to confirm suspicions, ensuring that any action taken would be precise and irreversible. The city had become a chessboard, and every piece moved under Arjun's careful control. He could no longer trust appearances, and every ally, no matter how close, became a potential threat until proven otherwise. As the investigation progressed, Arjun devised a plan that was both bold and calculated. Rather than confronting Ravi evenly, he orchestrated a scenario that would isolate him from his allies, cutting off access to critical operations and leaving him vulnerable without revealing his own intentions. Every step was measured to prevent panic among other associates, and to maintain the appearance of control. Rivals, sensing weakness, were kept at bay through displays of precision and ruthless efficiency. Arjun understood that a single mistake could trigger chaos, so every detail had to be flawless. The moment of reckoning arrived quietly but decisively. Ravi, unaware of the trap, made a move that revealed the extent of his duplicity. By then, Arjun had positioned his loyalists strategically, ensuring that betrayal would be punished swiftly and conclusively. Ravi was eliminated as a threat, his networks dismantled, and any evidence of his involvement removed before it could create further instability. The operation sent a silent but unmistakable message: betrayal would not be tolerated, and Arjun's authority remained absolute. The aftermath left Arjun both relieved and reflective. The betrayal had been a painful reminder that in the world he inhabited, loyalty was temporary, and trust was a weapon to be wielded with caution. Yet it also reinforced his dominance, demonstrating that even the closest associates could not undermine him without facing immediate consequences. Arjun's empire survived, stronger and more resilient, but he had learned a harsh lesson. Vigilance was never optional, and power demanded constant calculation, ruthlessness, and the willingness to act decisively when deception threatened everything he had built. Even the most carefully constructed empires can crumble, and Arjun Desai learned this lesson in the harshest way. After eliminating Ravi Kapoor and reasserting control over his network, Arjun believed he had secured his position. Yet, the combination of relentless law enforcement, rival gangs, and the unpredictable human factor began to take its toll. Small cracks that had once been manageable grew into significant threats, testing the limits of his patience, strategy, and influence. The city he had dominated for years no longer responded to his control as effortlessly as before. It began with a minor slip, a communication intercepted, a shipment delayed, a loyal associate acting rashly under pressure. To outsiders, these events seemed insignificant, but Arjun understood that even minor disruptions could trigger a chain reaction capable of dismantling everything he had built. He tried to contain the fallout, personally overseeing operations and intervening where he could, but the web of influence had grown too large. Every ally had his own agenda, every rival sensed opportunity, and even the Chicago syndicate, whose alliance had once strengthened him, began demanding stricter loyalty tests. The breaking point came when the authorities launched a large-scale raid on one of his main operational hubs. Information had leaked, though Arjun was unsure from whom, and law enforcement struck with unprecedented precision. Guns, cash, and valuable intelligence were confiscated. Several trusted associates were arrested, while others met violent ends at the hands of rival gangs eager to exploit the chaos. The empire that had once seemed untouchable now faced public humiliation and internal collapse. Arjun barely escaped, disappearing into the shadows, while watching the structures he had built crumble around him. Panic spread among his remaining allies. Some fled, fearing arrest or retaliation, while others attempted to seize power for themselves. Arjun realized that his authority, which had once been absolute, was now contested at every level. Communication became fragmented, trust vanished, and paranoia replaced loyalty. Decisions that once required strategy now demanded urgency, as threats emerged simultaneously from every angle. Survival required not just intelligence, but constant vigilance, and even then, victory was never guaranteed. Amid the chaos, Arjun reflected on the lessons of betrayal and ambition. He realized that the same drive that had elevated him from the crowded streets of Mumbai to the top of Los Angeles's underworld also made him vulnerable. Ambition attracts enemies, success draws scrutiny, and power demands sacrifices that can never be fully predicted. His empire, once a symbol of fear and respect, had become a fragile network of temporary alliances and uncertain loyalties. Every day was a test of resilience, and the margin for error had become vanishingly small. Despite the losses, Arjun refused to vanish entirely. He retreated into secrecy, continuing to operate through intermediaries and hidden channels. Though his empire was fractured, the legend of Arjun Desai persisted. Rivals remained wary, authorities still hunted him, and those who had betrayed him paid dearly for their mistakes. Yet, the man who had once commanded entire neighborhoods now understood the bitter reality of impermanence. Power can be built with ambition, but empires survive only with constant adaptation, ruthlessness, and the ability to anticipate both enemies and allies. Arjun's story had reached a critical juncture. His empire was shattered, yet he endured. Los Angeles had tested him, betrayal had scarred him, and the law had cornered him. But Arjun Desai was a survivor, and even in the face of collapse, his shadow continued to loom over the streets, a reminder that the fall of a gangster is never absolute, and the legacy of ambition can persist long after the empire itself has crumbled. Even after his empire in Los Angeles had shattered, Arjun Desai's presence continued to linger in the shadows. The raids, betrayals, and violent losses had forced him to disappear from public view, but he was far from defeated. He had learned the hardest lessons: trust was fragile, power was fleeting, and survival required more cunning than brute strength. While the streets he once ruled whispered his name with caution and fear, Arjun moved quietly, observing, planning and calculating his next steps. The empire might have crumbled, but the man behind it had not. No one knew his exact whereabouts. Some claimed he had fled to another country, adopting a new identity to escape the authorities and rival factions alike. Others believed he had gone underground in Los Angeles, operating through intermediaries who carried out his plans without revealing his involvement. Stories of sudden disappearances, unexplained attacks on rival operations, and shadowy figures appearing in key moments fueled the legend of Arjun Desai. His legacy had become less about physical control and more about influence, the ability to shape outcomes without being seen. Despite the secrecy, Arjun's mind never rested. He analyzed his past moves, identified mistakes, and studied the patterns of those who had betrayed him. Each day was spent mapping the networks of allies and enemies, calculating who could be useful, who could be trusted, and who was likely to turn against him. His survival instincts, honed on the crowded streets of Mumbai and refined through years of navigating Los Angeles's underworld, were sharper than ever. Every detail mattered, from the smallest financial transaction to the faintest rumor circulating among rival gangs. At the same time, Arjun began contemplating his legacy. He understood that empires are temporary, but the lessons they leave behind can endure. Stories of his rise and near fall became cautionary tales in the criminal underworld, whispered among newcomers who sought to emulate his strategies while avoiding his mistakes. He realized that fear, respect, and intelligence could create influence that outlived wealth, violence, and physical dominance. His name had become a symbol, a reminder that ambition can reach across continents, and survival requires constant vigilance. Even as authorities continued their investigations and rival gangs attempted to exploit his weakened position, Arjun remained untouchable. He had learned to vanish at the right moment, strike at the right time, and manipulate situations so that he always had an exit strategy. His survival was no longer about maintaining an empire, it was about outlasting his enemies, outthinking his rivals, and ensuring that any attempt to corner him would fail. The man who had once commanded respect through fear, now commanded it through reputation and mystery. Arjun Desai's story remains unresolved in the public eye. Some say he lives under a new identity, quietly influencing networks from the shadows. Others believe he continues to operate clandestinely, a ghost moving through the criminal underworld, untouchable and unpredictable. What is certain is that the rise, fall, and continued presence of Arjun Desai, the Mumbai gangster who conquered American streets, serve as a chilling reminder. Power is temporary, but cunning, adaptability, and ruthlessness can create a legacy that endures far beyond the fall of any empire. In the end, Arjun Desai did not vanish. He became a shadow, a legend, and a warning that ambition, when combined with intelligence and survival instincts, can never be entirely extinguished.